There have been many other massacres in Pakistan carried out by their own army, an army which is idolized by millions and which has intensively undermined the confidence of the nation in it over these last 12 months or so. I came in to Pakistan politics in the 1970s when a general arrested the then Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and hanged him on trumped-up charges because Mr. Bhutto wanted a transformation in the setup in Pakistan, the disinheriting of the oligarchy which had ruled since independence, and above all, putting the armed forces in their place. So they murdered him. It's amazing that they haven't yet murdered Imran Khan, who equally wishes to transform, revolutionize the sclerotic, decrepit, broken down and utterly corrupted institutions of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which has become a mockery of everything that it claimed to be, a mockery of everything that Mr. Jinnah declared that it would be. The leader of the masses, Imran Khan, has not yet been killed, but maybe hundreds of his supporters were killed yesterday. Not content with blocking the roads, cutting off the internet, stopping social media platforms from operating in the country, not content with the myriad of disappearances, false imprisonments, fake charges, and all the other paraphernalia of soft dictatorship, they realized that this crowd that was descending on Islamabad contained within it the numbers and the determination to sweep them away, to sweep their leader, Imran Khan, out of prison and back into his rightful place in the Prime Minister's house, after which they feared his revenge would be condign, after which they feared that all the crimes they'd committed against him, against his wife, against his relatives, against his party men, and against Pakistan would have to be reckoned with. So the stakes were high, and therefore the reaction, the last gasp reaction of the Pakistani generals was to order their soldiers to open fire on the people who had admired and loved them all of their lives. But the risk is now that the stakes have been raised so significantly that only a full-scale, all-out revolution, which sweeps away all of these generals. I've known these generals. They presented me with awards, bent over double with the weight of their medals on their chests, unearned except if you count murdering your own leaders and murdering your own people as a proper role for a military. The moment will come when the Pakistan military will crack, when the ordinary Jawan will refuse orders to fire upon his own neighbors, upon his own people, his own classmates, and maybe even his own family. There's only so much killing of your own people that you can order your military to do. We've seen that before. The Shah of Persia was all powerful. The Shah of Shahs. He had the most fearsome security service in the entire world, the SAVAK. He had millions of soldiers holding rifles that fired 6, 10, 12 bullets each. But the moment comes when the soldier realizes that he's already fired 10 shots. And in another 2, he will be quite disarmed. And that in front of them is a crowd of thousands of the enragés, of the enraged, who will tear him to pieces, limb from limb, when he runs out of ammunition, and maybe even before that. That's the place we are now in Pakistan. I have been involved in the country, as I said, from the 1970s in defense of the life of the aforementioned Mr. Bhutto. We all failed. He was hanged, and he left a political dynasty. His daughter, Benazir, was my close friend for many decades. I was with her, at her side, during dark days and fine. I make that point to underscore the point I always make. I am not a supporter of Imran Khan's party, the PTI. I never have been. In other circumstances, I would have been campaigning for his opponents in the Pakistan People's Party. Imran Khan's a friend of mine. I admire him. But I'm not his party man. I'm not his political supporter. But he is the legitimate Prime Minister of Pakistan. He was removed from office in an American organized coup because he said the two words, absolutely not. When asked by the Americans if he would allow American bases, CIA bases in the country, the better to make war against the people of Afghanistan, he answered, absolutely not. It didn't help that he was in Russia on the day that the invasion of Ukraine began and made it plain and obvious that he would not be joining any anti-Russian front. So the Americans decided to overthrow them. So I'm not a supporter of the PTI, but I am a supporter of Pakistan. And one of my high civil awards is for my work on the movement for the restoration of democracy in Pakistan. I can't have been in favor of democracy in Pakistan in the 1970s and 80s and be against democracy now in 2024. So I have no alternative but to stand with the masses on the march for the restoration of democracy in Pakistan from the very same generals and oligarchs that I opposed all those decades ago. The question of what happens next will turn on how strongly the generals, especially the Chief of Staff, Munir, I won't give him his further titles, he doesn't deserve them, whether he decides that he's willing to wade through an ocean of his own countrymen and women's blood in order to continue to protect a coalition government imported from exile and straight off the page of the Police Gazette of the Interpol wanted list of crooks and comic singers. The decision will, of course, be made in Washington. The government of Pakistan and the army leadership in Pakistan are entirely beholden to the United States. Just like the Egyptian army, they are bought and paid for, and the person who owns them, the power that owns them, keeps them not to confront the nation's enemies, to defend the nation's borders. If that were so, the Egyptian army would have been engaged more than 14 months ago against the mass slaughter just over a small wall on their own borders. But they are not, because their owners don't pay them for that. And the same is true of the government of Pakistan and its armed forces. So what the incoming administration of Donald Trump will have to work out, how expensive will it be to allow this oligarchy and these tin pot army generals to massacre maybe millions of their own people? Will they be swept away, and will the price of that be deemed too high? We'll be talking to a man who knows just in a few minutes about that. Much of the news is on the ceasefire that the apartheid state, Netanyahu, has concluded with the Lebanese state, such as it is. The ceasefire does not, of course, include the Lebanese resistance, because they have been helpfully deemed to be a terrorist organization that may not be powwowed with and may not be in any way glorified by me, for example. Were I to glorify the Lebanese national resistance, I would be arrested and charged, because this is Britain in 2024. So if I can, very carefully, avoid any glorification, let me say that this represents an historic victory again for the Lebanese resistance, which has again driven the Israeli forces from their land, which has again fought the Israeli forces to a standstill, killed, wounded, and destroyed substantial elements of their ground force invasion and their war materiel, and again is able to say that Israel was unable to capture a single village or a single town in more than 40 days of pouring scores of thousands of their men into the maw of the war in the south of Lebanon, and they completely failed. As of yet, it's not illegal in Britain to disrespect Netanyahu. But if the reports that the Israeli army itself is seeking to assassinate Netanyahu, a theory advanced by no less than Mrs. Netanyahu, who has publicly said so, that there is a military coup coming in Israel, I say, what took you so long? I say, that's probably the only way out, because the armed forces are fighting for an inglorious, dishonorable, disreputable, crooked, wretched criminal, Netanyahu. And he's not worth the bones of a Pomeranian grenadier. So there's no political alternative to Benjamin Netanyahu. All of the other politicians are even worse than he is. And so it seems to me that only an intervention by the Israeli armed forces can possibly save the entire region from an all-consuming regional war, which might quickly become World War III. Because if, as Netanyahu claims, he has paused firing in the north with the Lebanese resistance to concentrate on the threat, as he describes it, of Iran, well, you better batten down the hatches, because the threat from Iran hasn't gone away and may even be in the skies tonight. The threat from the axis of resistance hasn't gone away. The threat from the mere existence, never mind resistance, of the Palestinian people hasn't gone away. And if it is the intention of Netanyahu to exercise the Samson option, then all of us are finished. Because Iran, right now, this night, undeclared, has hundreds of nuclear weapons. They multiplied their highly enriched uranium stocks last week. They said, Larijani said, in response to a claim by the IAEA that it would only take them 48 hours to put that highly enriched uranium on the tip of a missile. Larijani corrected them and said it will take us 24 hours. And those 24 hours have elapsed. Iran now has a strategic military agreement with both China and Russia. It now has at least as many nuclear weapons as Israel has. So if Netanyahu wishes to unleash the dogs of war and cry havoc, and if, as has been promised, the American and British governments go to war on Netanyahu's behalf, despite the fact he's a wanted criminal that they will have to arrest if he turns up in their capital cities. Work that one out. Explain that one to your children as they are sent off to war for Netanyahu, the wanted criminal. If that happens, then the ball, as we say in Scotland, is on the slates. There's no going back from that. You cannot unsee it. You cannot unhear it. You cannot unfeel it. My last words of scorn in this monologue are for the Pompadour victim of child sexual abuse, Emmanuel Macron. I call him so because his school teacher interfered with him in the classroom when she was his teacher, now his wife. There are some who claim the story is even more colorful than that, but who am I to pry into a French boudoir? What I do know is that this Macron is so puerile. He announced not 5 days ago that France would arrest Netanyahu if he arrived. He couldn't explain the conundrum either of how he was going to continue giving weapons to a man he was publicly pledged to arrest on war crimes charges and charges of crimes against humanity. But 5 days ago, Macron said France would do its duty by the International Criminal Court. Today, he declared that he would not do so after all. Today, he declared that Israel is not subject to the International Criminal Court because it is not a signatory to it. But neither was Russia. That didn't stop them issuing arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin. That didn't stop the French government seizing Russian assets, even though they were not a party to the ICC. Neither was Syria, but that didn't stop them pouring billions into a regime change operation which continues to this day in the Syrian Arab Republic, and it certainly didn't stop the government of France from deploying a raft of sanctions, including property seizures of Syrian officials, including the President Bashar al-Assad. The depth of the hypocrisy of these people has reached the stage where even their own families must be laughing at them, must be asking them, wait, what? Israel can't be arrested because they're not in the ICC, but Russia must be arrested even though it is not in the ICC. How can any sane, rational person, never mind the educated, cultured French, accept such an absurdity? Well, so far, they are. We'll be talking about it with Gadi Francis, no less, in the second hour of the show. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.